Kolbjorn, a name found through randomization. On the character sheet standing out as random letters and symbols thrown together like parents attempting unique baby names. If people have to smash their keyboard simply to address him, it'd take attention away from his short round stature. Alas, he'd be referred to as Kolbjorn, and can't hide the fact that he's a dwarf, who swam all the way from Dwarven land to these docks for the honor of being a servant under the queen. At the royal castle, Cole met another servant who gave him the rundown. When asked about his skills, he explained that he's a strong dwarf. His only job experience is having a low center of gravity. That talent would be wasted in the kitchen, reduced to slicing onions filled with tear gas. Sneaking away from the kitchen, Kolbjorn the dwarf hid behind a statue in the throne room to watch the latest drama. A fancy faction with their feathered caps waltzed in demanding to see the king. These fools pulled a misarchy on the queen. Calling for blood, the knights attacked the foreign swordsmen, inspiring the awkward dance of group combat where comrades use each other as meat shields and accidental targets. Using finely choreographed movement, the dancers flawlessly transitioned their performance to the next room. Beautiful fencing on display until the stage accident. A door had closed on an actor, not in the sense they were moving back home to get a day job. This closure was literal, an exit from the spotlight involving the star having their organs scattered all over the set. At the rap party, Kolbjorn found a sword on the ground taller than a dwarf. Wearing the blade on his back, he returned to his fellow servant to brag about how rad he is. A superior then requested one of the servants to go clean that gory mess previously witnessed. Kolbjorn volunteered to play janitor. Eager to be in a death epicenter major as the throne room, he'd do whatever to stick around, except give up his sword, which is exactly what a rule-humping knight demanded of the servant. Refusal was expressed through a cheesy line and an attempted suicide by Knight. Scratched the royal guard's armor twice before he lost his weapon. The fight was over in seconds, but it was in Kolbjorn's blood to enjoy bleeding. To live in this society, you're forced to select one flaw. Pain Freak was chosen, thinking it'd make him harder to beat up. Don't know if it does shit though. The knight assaulted, rightfully so, one of the servants' head. Arguing against the death penalty was one of the queen's chillest men. Shocking, really. Typically everybody in these medieval times will kill you over the slightest infraction. Kolbjorn standing up for his rights created a heated debate between two knights. Neither was budging. Kolb, however, didn't care either way. Dungeon or wolf pit, all the same to him. The execution-seeking knight was suddenly shoved and struck by the kind pro-captivity noble, leading to a passion-fueled scuffle. That whore of a dwarf saw this as a love triangle. Probably not. At least the calamity lessened the severity of Colby's crime. He also got a chance to tell his lie of the story while that sword-stealing knight couldn't defend himself after developing an incomprehensible stutter found in those who recently got their ass beat. Kolbjorn was injured too, taken to church for stripping and healing to officially make him an altar boy. On his way back to the castle, this convict took a nap on the shoulders of the guard carrying him. Woke up on the throne room's trapdoor. Beneath it were wolves this dwarf wanted to cuddle. Some counselor elf bitch chimed in as if he was calling the shots. Queen didn't appreciate that, turning that sage advisor into a groveling coward. Ultimately, the queen didn't order anyone dead. Spared, Kolbjorn only got sentenced to the vague few nights in the dungeon. Locked up, he got the dungeon's keeper talking about his past as an arena fighter. Obviously the scheme here was to reignite that ego, maybe start a fight. The plan failed, so the prisoner wrote a letter to the police officer knight about his embarrassing behavior and challenged him to shoot a fair one. After his few nights in a cell, Kolbjorn's next fight would be a friendly spar with the Jester. Aiming for the head, the dwarf was hitting the Jester's chest due to the clear height disadvantage, although he managed to land at least one critical blow. That's when the funny fellow went lower and jabbed Kolb in the nuts, a pain that'll put most men down for the count. Kolbjorn was one of those men. Unable to stand, he forfeited. Shame, great shame sent him under a safety railing and into the river infested with taser plants. Barely alive in the darkness, the dwarf known as Kolbjorn was finished off by an unknown assailant. Having deja vu since in another life, I've been ripped apart in the dark before by a Kolbjorn. Small worlds, one with zombies. That's what got a hold of our guy going for a suicidal swim. The zombie was now already moving on to its next brain. Him and the human tapped it out until they went off screen. Down the stream, that zombie may have been stopped, yet another approached. A familiar face, now out of my control. A former employee, if you will. Putting in work, too. Zombie Kolbjorn pawed someone off their feet like a big friendly dog. Unfortunately, playfulness wasn't observed by whoever fired the euthanasia arrow. Digging below a servant, our next character is a lowly peasant named Rubrack. Why or what is the origin of a name like Rubrack? Duh, he burst out the womb rubbing racks. Plus he's a half-orc. Rubrack sounded orcish. Let me say real quick that the text popping up to tell you your location is helpful to a lost wanderer. Tiredness isn't. The need to sleep is a nuisance. Being a poverty-plagued peasant means you gotta be an opportunist. Unlock door at the inn, walk in. Oh, someone is already occupying the bed? Fuck it, sleep on top of them. Supposed to be a stealth operation. Cover was blown when Rubrack grabbed his items that were left in the bed and by mistake pulled the person he laid on top of to the floor. This half-orc fled out the joint with no idea whether or not he was being followed. Remember that eyes strictly for others in the back of heads aren't around in this era of space station. Rubrack was being tailed by the inn guests who he slept on without consent. One pissed off elf now had him by the throat. In his defense, Rubrack provided the solid alibi of, The elf didn't fall for it. Even accused him of stealing. Only thing he was guilty of stealing was a good night's sleep from the inn. Wound up paying for it when this asshole stole his starter coins. A mugging that terrifying will put your clenched cheeks in a church pew. Rubrack was always confused about religion. His father was an orc atheist, edgy, while his human mother was a Scientologist, spooky. Molded with a contradictory belief system, he was still willing to learn. Today's sermon covered spontaneous gender reassignment. Once a king, now a queen, perplexed about their womanhood. Of course Rubrack approved. Rack rubbing wasn't one of his urgent needs. What required fulfillment was thirst, hunger, and the blank card reserved for flaws. Rubrack chose to be a junkie, without a reliable plug. Drugs are fine, but food and water come first. He satisfied the cliche meat on a bone with an apple snatched from the bar. The doctor said one a day, didn't say how he had to get it. Again, opportunity was how he'd survive. Drink came next. Our scavenger found free water in a bucket. The fourth desire to be entertained was stroked when Rubrack saw people having a blast with swords and fire. Acquired his own sword. Now somebody get this man some fire. Everybody else was rolling in the flames while Rubrack only caught a trickle of ember from a fireball. At least enough to make him hot as the others. Never taught proper stop, drop, and roll technique, he couldn't resist the burning. Had to let him cool off on his own terms. Slightly charred. Nevertheless, Rubrack made it to the final screen. He deserved an upgrade from the peasant life, reborn to the cushy status of a jester. With this job, you're given a chest filled with more instruments than a botched surgery. Rubrack's favorite was the napkin that turned blowing into angelic singing. Quickly sidetracked since if parchment and feather are nearby, bullshit will be written. Rubrack wrote and played music to make the invisible haters take him seriously as an artist. It was all he could do really after realizing he was trapped up in his room overlooking the throne. Toss a chair down to get somebody's attention. Nobody cared. Couldn't joke his way out of this. Even if he could be heard, how could he tell amazing jokes about knights changing torches if the average Joe can't understand his orc gibberish? Throwing down his writings seemed to be the next logical step. The king did notice, but wasn't impressed. He went on to question the jester's intentions. Getting down was what Rubrack intended to do. By sacrificing his instruments, deploy someone into coming up to get his ass. Remaining in his possession was that piece of auto-tune fabric. The chants were too valuable. Finally an escape. He had to lay on his back to bypass the guardrail. Spread those legs, skip that line. To avoid waiting around, Rubrack leapt from a pipe to the throne room below. The landing fucked his legs. Crippling enough, he had to be hauled off. Sleep heals all pain. How did folks die so easily in the past? Just sleep it off. A little bed rest later and he was standing again. Freshly on his feet, Rubrack paid the king's negotiation wolves a visit. They appeared happy to see him. Resurfacing above, the jester got in between a dispute. His involvement began when he sized up the more rude and lower status looking gentleman. From the side, he sucker punched the entitled brat. That one hit knocked out the bloody bastard. His name was Micah, so he definitely deserved it. Post knockout, Rubrack attempted a one-liner with his orcish accent. Came out cool and coherent as Pootie Tang. Thankfully, the person he punched was still unconscious and couldn't hear his lameness. Seeking to hear lameness, the jester tried to attend a council meeting. Not invited, he resorted to his writing. These words were labeled a waste of scroll by a council member, giving Rubrack no choice. He had to scribe another poem. Why wouldn't they want the jester part of their council? He just wanted to fart in the corner like a gassy cuck. Out in the town, Rubrack saw a group he could join. A herd of guys marching to war. He enlisted angry mob style by grabbing a weapon off the ground and following the crowd. Deep in numbers and well armed, Rubrack felt safe traveling wherever to do war with these rallying rabble-rousers. Everyone's patience was then tested as the large collective clogged the gateway squares that load you into the other map. The siege on a fort belonging to the undead has begun. Fearlessly rushing in, the Jester swung his weapon at any skeleton-looking motherfucker. Bones crumbled and flesh bled. Rubrack hung out around the base's entrance to whack the undead soon as they popped out. Cheap prick. Retreating a few paces back, he was taken down by one of the bony terrorists, resulting in him having to crawl away from the action. When he dipped in for more, he received the same level of hospitality as before. Lost his weapon that time. He went and took a dead guy's sword with hopes of becoming another dead guy with a sword. Infiltrating the enemy holdout got Rubrack immediately put on the floor. A lovely wooden floor, perfect to accept fatal blood loss on. Somehow those cuts weren't enough. Rubrack was able to drag his own ass out of there. He continued to fight too. On the battlefield, less skeletons were standing than before, while the kingdom of Vanderlin still had the larger army. Victory looked promising. Regardless, Rubrack wanted to die in combat. Basically already dead, he fought his last fight against a skeleton hiding in the woods, like stumbling upon a tweaker's nest.